So let's talk about Robert Creeley's I Know a Man. Let's talk about the video discussion that we see in ModPo and how we view it as teachers and how we might bring it into our own classrooms or advise others who are thinking about bringing ModPo and one of the videos into their classrooms. And I think we should watch it and talk about it. We'll do a sort of behind the scenes chatter about it.
So we're talking about Robert Creeley's very famous, much anthologized poem, I Know a Man. And usually Creeley's associated with the Black Mountain School of Poetry, but Creeley was someone who really helped form the community, or as he put it, the company of new American poets, crossing communities. And in this poem, he seems to have some kind of relationship with the beat poetry.
I notice already that they're all looking down at the text. That's not always true.
No.
There's something about this poem, even I'm blurbing on about context, and they're looking at the text. I just have to point that out.
And we just needed to do Creeley in this course, so we have Creeley. It doesn't quite perfectly fit. For instance, the lines are not long, for one thing. Okay, so we have this poem. What's happening? Is he unlike a lot of Creeley poems, he's telling about something. There's a scene here. Molly, where are we?
I'm not sure where we are, but he's talking about a conversation that he had with a friend.
Mm-hmm. Well, we do know where he is.
Well, I guess we're in a car.
They're in a car, yeah. They're driving somewhere.
I'm going to say something kind of obvious, but I think it's still worth saying, which is in many of these poems, you begin with specific words and specific phrases. There's another way, of course, to open a close reading, which is, where are we? Let's ask some basic questions about the entire poem.
Yeah.
So take a moment to read it. Who's speaking is also another common first question to throw out there. So especially for teachers who are wondering where to begin with a poem, that's always a great place.
Well, you notice I felt like I'd failed to set it up that way. So I literally turn to the other side of the table and I say to someone, I think it's Dave or Emily, why do you like this poem so much? So I was kind of bailing out of that first approach.
Yeah.
And what Emily says, I think it's Emily, is so brilliant that it launches us, what's so exciting about this poem. So let's hear what she says.
Maybe the laughter in that sort of Harvard reading is a little pretentious, but it is...
Oh, you're referring to one of the many recordings we have on Penn Sound of Creeley reading this poem, and one of them is at Harvard.
Yes, I am.
And the Harvard audience laughs at the end. Why do you think they laugh?
Well, because there's something about punchline. Is this person, the way I read it is he's going on this sort of existential, philosophical jag behind the wheel, this speaker of the poem.
Hi. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And it's this sort of...
Who's he talking to?
A man he either knows or doesn't know. Someone he thinks he knows but doesn't know that well.
So who's driving?
The speaker of the poem.
The speaker, so presumably John is in the passenger seat.
Yeah.
Or John, as it were.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And what's the punchline?
The punchline is he's wondering, what do we do in the darkness? What do we deploy against the sort of uncertainty and sadness? And he's sort of already deployed it, isn't he? He has the car. He's in the car. He's driving. And sort of by asking those questions, he incapacitates himself from actually finding answers.
Oh, you went big right away. Why do you think they laughed?
Because we all sort of know someone like this, right? It's who asks these questions but doesn't attend to someone who has all the philosophical parts but none of the practical parts. Mm-hmm. Or he does, but he forgets about it, and he has to drive the car rather than just talk about the car.
So when I turned to get away from my failure as a teacher to elicit the basics, Emily wound up teaching the whole poem. So now it was great, but now we're done.
It's amazing watching it now to realize how quickly some of the basic first things that you might do with the poem in the class happens within 10 seconds. Addressing who the speaker is, who the John is, figuring out how to negotiate the I.
And she stayed with it. She had something to say, but I kept interrupting her to get that stuff out. She answered all that well, and then still stayed on the train. And I think the moment that I saved it from digression caused by my grilling her about the narrative situation was when I said, okay, so why do you think they laughed at Harvard? But I also had to footnote the Harvard, because she said the Harvard audience.
Right.
And people watching the video wouldn't know that unless I had to. So I had to fill in the footnote, quiz her about the narration, and she still stayed on it. That's how good she is. But I saved the day by asking her, why did they laugh?
Mm-hmm.
And that becomes, well, that's what happens next.
John, or whoever this other person is reminding him of what?
That he's alive, that he's a body, that he exists in the world rather than just in his mind.
Okay. And Maurice, your thought on this?
I like the emotional intensity of it and the uncertainty that Emily was talking about. And I liked also the way each of the ends of the line seems to turn, so that you have to, especially like because I am, and then I am always talking seems sort of a qualifier for that mode of being.
So Creeley not only situates this on the page that demands your attention in a William Carlos Williams sort of way, but he also performs it with a great break, even if the grammar suggests enjambment. Yeah? And so let's take an example. As I said to my friend, because I am always talking, what do the breaks suggest?
Well, there isn't a relationship of ownership here. There's an exchange going on between he and his friend, and the relation is perhaps defined by that talking, by that exchange of expression.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I am proud of this video because I'm really relaxed, and I'm letting them go wherever they're going to go. After that initial panic, it became clear that they were just going to do what they're going to do. Mm-hmm. So Emily is into mocking existentialist fuzzy-headedness. Mm-hmm. Maurice is into the formalities. Mm-hmm. They just do what they do, and this is a way of like letting students be good at what they're good at.
Mm-hmm.
And is this other person maybe a stand-in for us? I don't know.
I mean, the other person is there, and is there to listen, it seems, but is not necessarily like on the same page as the speaker. The other person maybe is a little more grounded. You know, he's the one that. This is why I think it is satirized at the end, where the other person has to say, "Look out where you're going."
Satirizing what? What position or what personality is being satirized?
Satirizing that incessantly talking that
chattering monkey beat,
right.
You know, on speed, talking existential talk. Not so Yeah, go ahead, Emily.
So we talked about Kerouac and how sort of the mantra, the doctrine of these people is to just go without hesitation. And so he's talking about it, and it seems like that sort of, that command, just drive, look out where you're going, is telling him to do and go rather than just talk about doing.
Okay, so that's the beat position?
Would it be? Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And so what's the speaker's position?
Does he know his position yet? Can we say that with...
Well, he asks the question, what can we do against it? There seem to be two options. Dave, Poplar, what are some of the options about what we can do against it?
I think that the poem is saying the beat generation tries to make themselves receptive to everything by going so fast. They're getting images quick here and there, and he's so confused by it all. He wants to buy a big car, even though he's reminded he's in a car. And he's basically, in the end, saying, look out where you're going. You're not seeing everything.
Who's saying that?
Well, John is saying that, but John is such a common name, too. John might be a stand-in for the whole populace that Kerouac was calling.
Okay, so we really do have some options here. What can we do against it? Or else shall we? All right, first of all, what can we do against it before we consider whether we should?
There's a way in which you keep coming back to the question of subjectivity and intersubjectivity without naming it, because you've several times now you've said who is John, who am I, who's the I, and so the shifting is like happening is being acknowledged in the discussion without being named, which I think is really cool.
Thank you. I am being rather insistent, and as I recall, I think I start getting answers to this question, but I guess. So if you look at a pedagogy that seems very open because it's participatory, don't be fooled in thinking that the teacher is not being pretty rigorous about keeping people to a certain set of issues,
right?
So that we cover those issues. Coverage is you can be participatory in the classroom, but still cover a lot of stuff. I guess just to be sort of on your toes.
What are the options in this poem?
So I asked it again.
The options to me are either talk or drive.
Talk or drive, right. And can we abstract? Talk or drive, or what or what?
Trying to get the binary.
Think or do. Which of the two does the poem as a poem ally itself with? With which of the two does the poem ally itself?
I think speaking, but in this very concentrated sense, right? Driving provides a space of enclosure and containment for these two passengers, and it kind of forces them to converge on their differences.
How else does it align itself with speaking?
It's words.
It's words. It's a poem.
Very controlled.
To what extent does it ally itself with driving?
I realized, reviewing this, that there's a moment where I just learned, by talking and teaching, I learned something about the poem I hadn't thought of. Mm-hmm. And it's something like this. So we get to the binarism of talking and doing in the poem. Mm-hmm. Clearly the poem sees itself as talking, and therefore the speaker, or Creeley, is going to ironize that. But in what way is the poem driving? And as soon as I said that, I thought, what a fucking great question. Because driving and digressing and veering, just walking around, the driverless car at the end to Elsie, these are important points in modernism where the poems go where they're going to go. And this poem is very digressive in its grammar and syntax.
And I remember...
And it's driving. I guess when I asked that question, I got very excited. Mm-hmm. And I haven't answered it for them, and I don't think I do. I think they figure it out. This poem is driving as much as it's talking.
And it's such a good poem to read with the beats, too, because I've talked to students who were not at all charmed by the beats, counterculture attitude. They thought it was bullshit. They thought these are a bunch of privileged guys who have the means to quit school and buy a car and drive it across the country and kick back. And we had a really interesting discussion about those choices. And so this poem helps read that problem.
And he has an uneasy relationship. I think the Mallorca going, Bolinas living Creeley felt part of that company. But at the same time, he knew that the aesthetic wasn't, they believed in a kind of natural language. They believed in true improvisation. And he's doing his projective thing. So he's playing that out here, I think.
But the other question is, so I've been asking what can we do against it, and whether, which talking or driving is something we can do against it, the darkness. But then he says, or else shall we? Or else shall we? Or else shall we do something against it? What's that option mean? Shall we even bother to do something against it? Shall we drive into the darkness? Shall we accept the existential crisis? And why not do what? Why not what?
Either.
Yes, I know what it said. I know the poem says buy a goddamn big car, but what does that mean, Maurice?
I think it starts out with this very
I feel like I do that a lot
when
I start to get the easy answer. And I think I learned that from you, Alice. I'll gently, chide the student for going the easy route.
Yeah,
and say, come on.
That's in the poem.
Come on, you know that we can go a little further than that.
Yeah, and it's kind of unfair because sometimes when they do the second level answer, I chastise them for going too fast to the second level. So they're not quite sure.
You have to have the right emotional balance in the room, I think, to not step on toes, but challenge your students, in an interpersonal way.
Yeah, you want to create a setting where everybody finishes the job and feels like some rigorous work was being done, rather than an anything goes situation entirely, where people feel like, well, we had a good talk, but I'm not sure we know what we said.
Right.
Somewhere between those two things. Yeah.
Why not buy a goddamn big car? What's he talking about now?
This seems to... The goddamn big car seems to be this sort of bourgeois suburban aspiration to start your family. You get your big car, you get your house, and so why not just sell out?
Or it's a jalopy. It's a goddamn big car that we paid $26.
I feel like that's what he's already driving right now.
Yeah, maybe. Maybe. I tend to agree with you. Nobody's really concluded this for sure about this poem, which is much talked about. Buy a goddamn car. One of the things we can do against the darkness is to sell out, I think is what you're saying. And then it's at that point that the passenger, who's essentially a cipher, just a passenger, says, you're in this car now. We are here now, as Emily was saying. And you probably ought to drive it, or the existential crisis is going to get a lot worse. Emily, final word? Maybe you just want to repeat what you said at the beginning.
I think you said it well. It's just touching. It brings him from this place of abstraction to this plate of sort of concrete physical existence. And rather than that being confining or scary or dark, it becomes some type of solace. It answers the sort of scary question that he asks himself.
Good. I'm going to give Molly a final word. Why do you like this poem so much? What's it do for you?
I like it because it incorporates that urge to talk and to drive and to go, but it also comes back to reality at the end.
And you like the reality, coming back to reality at the end? You're not really ready to hit the road?
I'm not sure where I am, but I like to know that it's there.
Well, in another session, we'll talk about where you are. For now, I think we've done a good job on I Know a Man.
16 minutes. It's the perfect ModPo video. Everybody talks. I don't spiel on at the end. I give Molly the last word. And then we think about it, and there's all this stuff that never got said.
Oh, there's still so much to say. I want to talk for an hour about American car culture.
Yeah.
Right.
So the question becomes, what do I was at my most relaxed in this video, and also I was kind of controlling the discourse, but there's still a whole lot more we didn't talk about.
And for me, it's interesting. The video is interesting pedagogically because the conversation that happens in the video is not the conversation that I've had when I've taught this poem. And I think that part of that might be my own fear of tackling a question like that, which is a big, super intense, important question. So,
and why do you worry about that? You mean in the CUNY setting, probably, huh?
Yeah. Or, I think in any setting, even when I'm working with other teachers, it's, questions that are that loaded feel kind of scary to me. So I will always go immediately
to the formal stuff.
To the form. Mm-hmm. And I found it really useful to watch the other thing happening and to kind of see how the dynamics of the conversation and the different questions that were being asked allowed that question to be explored in a way that I thought was really productive.
Mm-hmm. So maybe the video can enter classrooms where the teacher doesn't feel it's appropriate to push the existential crisis, and then they can talk about how these people engaged with it.
One of the reasons why I like this particular video so much is because I feel like it's a model. It kind of makes me feel like I want to try something outside of my comfort zone in the classroom, even though the pain might happen, but because it's very clear that the investment in the poem is of a very specific register, and it's really exciting. And it kind of makes me, as a teacher who teaches this poem, want to try and go to a different place and see what, what might happen then.
When I first started teaching, I used to try to really control things, and I really worried about completeness and getting everything. And I just started to let go of that, mostly because I started remembering when I was a student, I didn't get 10% of this, right? When I took English 88 with Al, however many years ago, I read a bunch of this stuff, but I'm still reading it, and I'm still getting it, and I'm still having new ideas.
Or still not getting it.
That's what, either.
Dickinson.
Both.
Wow.
Right. And teaching is amazing when you open it up to the students a little more. You learn things. They have different there are certain poems I feel like I never get the same reading out of twice with students.
To Elsie.
It's so exciting. Oh, to Elsie. Because I have a lot of students who identify with Elsie and are freaked out, but have all these other things. There's just so much to be gained in letting go and letting it happen and learning from it.
The poems teach us how to read them. They teach us how to teach them. These are all the notes you need to a certain extent. Like the poem tells you how to do it. It doesn't give away all the answers. You have to find them in the poem. You have to work with the poem. You can't simply apprehend it. You have to do it in dialogue. You have to do it with your students.
Did you just say that the poems teach us how to teach them?
I did.
Yeah.
That is so right.
Yeah.
And aren't we doing honor to the poems and the poets and the aesthetic?
Yeah.
If we let the poems guide us, how Here's how I should be taught. Don't violate me.
Mm-hmm.
Try to teach in the spirit, in the mode, in the style, in the tenor, in the language. Talk about letting language into the room. Let the poet's linguistic position into the room.